Welcome, everyone. Hopefully, you're not too full from the full carb lunch downstairs. Thanks for attending our talk today. I'm Jim Godoldik, Director of Virtual Production and head up Dimension North America. I am accompanied by two of my colleagues here. I'll introduce themselves.
Just checking the mic. Yeah. Hi, my name is Ed. I'm a head of real-time and virtual production.
I'm Mark Holland. I'm head of content management.
So I thought we'd dive into our talk today, which is covering end-to-end virtual production. For those of you who don't know who Dimension is, I have a lovely reel that I can show you some of our recent work. So that's a small taste of what we do. At Dimension, we work across not only virtual production using a lot of different real-time technologies, volumetric capture, and digital humans and digital twins. So a pretty wide variety of different tool sets, different approaches, different methodologies for a lot of the different projects that you see. And I'm sure as many of you are working in varied fields here at the Fest this year, you know that there's no one ring to rule them all in terms of approaches. Right tool for the job. We're here today to talk about virtual production and end-to-end solutions. A lot of the asset creation, capture technology, LED technology, game engine technology that a lot of us are all using, obviously, is rooted with Unreal. For Unreal 4 into Unreal 5 and future versions. Real-time content that we work on, obviously, core focus of Dimension being between virtual production and other industries, film and TV or film and episodic, all the way down to the metaverse. This is our Machinima project that, what month did we release that into the wild? It feels like our NFT blockchain project.
That was, I think it was about 3-4 months ago now, Actually, just time flies.
Which if you're into the blockchain, it's a pretty awesome project.
Yeah, I still don't understand any of it, by the way. So if anyone here can explain it to me, we
can follow up on NFTs later and blockchain and how that ties into the metaverse. But what we see is that a lot of the assets that we're creating for film and TV and other projects is the intention is that those assets are also winding up into the metaverse. Whatever any of you think it is today, it's all of that and above. Virtual production, what we're, I think, all here to talk about, and this has been really exciting for the past couple of years. Obviously, the merging of live action and digital with real-time technologies. Show of hands, just how many people have been working in virtual production over the past couple of years? So awesome, perfect crowd. We're right at home. I say that virtual production has a lot of marketing and PR around LED volumes, and one of the key things stating in there is like virtual production is not specific to working on LED volume. It's kind of a catch-all or umbrella term for a lot of different technologies and a lot of different approaches to that. So it could still be on green screen and blue screen. It can involve mocap. There's a lot of different approaches to virtual production. So this is live action production. On the top is you've got some of your tried and true traditional production roles, marrying those with VFX and CG roles, kind of their counterparts and terminologies across the job sector. Earlier this year, we announced our joint venture partnership in virtual production and launched the virtual production division at Dneg with our friends. And I think, Jim, correct me if I'm wrong, but it was in February of this year. It was official. So in that time, we'd been working with Dneg. Dimension and Dneg had been working together over the past couple of years, doing a lot of R&D and joint projects together. And we kind of formalized this through the Dneg virtual production division at Dneg. And I have the VP reel for Dneg, VP.
Traditional VFX for movies and film have been done exactly the same way for 20 years. When something like Unreal Engine comes along, they take all of those individual aspects of a traditional pipeline that are normally linear, and they just put them all into one environment.
At the core of virtual production in this context is the real-time games engine, the representation of those 3D worlds on a giant LED wall to create the illusion or the viewer that what they are seeing is a location or environment that you're not actually in.
We could just concentrate on blocking out the scenes, rehearsing them, showing them to the crew, figuring out the coverage. And when we saw the wall, it was doing its thing. It's as if the set is really there. You build a digital world, and then you can move things around and make changes as you're discussing them. It's infinitely malleable. You can do anything.
Let's say I want an aerial shot. I can tilt the world and film that rather than tilting the camera.
We're able to bring the world of Tripoli to the set. We were designing the Tripoli component inside the Unreal Engine. It's a virtual world. And we could enter into that virtual world by putting on a VR headset.
Until you stood in it, it's very difficult to visualize issues you may run into. With the headset and that VR recce ability, then you really can get to the crux of that very comprehensively.
We've been really scrutinizing each prop, all the lighting, the kind of atmospherics and everything to try and really match what it feels like to be in Tripoli. The ground, for instance, has to blend seamlessly into the texture of the digital ground. And once you've got that, it's very hard to see where reality ends and virtual reality begins.
That's a little bit about, yes. None of any of what I've showed can be done with our awesome teams that we have across Dimension and Dneg. These are some of the shows that we've worked on together recently. The one down in the bottom is what you just saw. Some of Fireworks was a test project we did with Paul Franklin at Dneg and the team, but Paul was directing Fireworks. I think it's also been making the rounds at some film festivals lately too.
Yeah, I mean, it was the first one we really cut our teeth on. It was very, very small. It was a short film as well. It was very modest volume in comparison to what now we play around in. So it was a good kicking off point, wasn't it?
Yeah. And this is just some tests from the Sky shoot that we had done. Similar setup, another smaller volume, but looking at the innovation project that we did with Sky and Dneg of stepping through how many different types of shoots we could do, everything from car process to sci-fi to narrative. And it was just a more of not just how quickly we could do it, but looking at the different types of shoots that could do well with LED volumes in virtual production and incorporating motion capture in real time onto the volume. This is actually a really cool part to it of having a Vicon system running in real time interactive with an actor on an LED volume.
Yeah, I mean, part of Dimension's history is very character-based, so, you know, we're starting to now we'll talk a little bit more about the characters on the world in a moment, but it's quite an interesting challenge at the moment to incorporate characters, whether they're pre-baked animation or live, so that was an example of just some R&D that we did recently.
Yeah, lots and lots of testing we do. So this is more about us in virtual production. And this is a loaded slide. I'm not going to read all of it, and I don't expect all of you to read it. But this is breaking down, you know, introductions to the departments, which is going to lead into more of the deeper talk here. But as many of you know that are working in virtual production, traditional visual effects, and production, it takes a village to get this done, and that is the same undertaking under virtual production as a whole, is how we break down our teams. I know it's also very confusing. There's lots of different talks. There's lots of PR into what a particular company calls their team versus the other. Is it brain bar? Is it volume control? Is it, you know, is it just art department or is it VAD? It's probably all of the above. And I think over the coming years, with things like the VP glossary and a lot of efforts between you know, the different unions too, that a lot of the confusion is going to kind of wade itself out in terms of role terminology, who does what on set, because at the end of the day, it's still production. So I think we're going to see a lot more blending of the roles and positions coming together. So I'll hand this over to Ed, because we're going to touch on what is the VAD.
We're not allowed to talk about VAD, are we?
Oh, yeah.
We're not allowed to call it anymore. I don't know. Is Phil here? I'm probably not. But yeah, that's what we're calling it at the moment. It will change, no doubt. But the next slide kind of describes probably what some of us have already heard over the last couple of days already, you know, variably, is this idea of Unreal Engine at the moment. I mean, it could be, you know, who knows what it's going to be in 5-10 years, but at the moment it's Unreal. And you know, as an idea, that Unreal is a holistic development environment. And so it's not just creating worlds that we put up on an LED volume. So with our partners at Dneg, what we're trying to do is to think about things holistically, to try and kind of disrupt the traditional VFX pipeline so it's more parallel as opposed to serial. You know, I guess you might have seen some of the other folks yesterday and this morning kind of talk about similar things. So, you know, there is a convergence toward that as an idea. And there are challenges, but we're already starting to see a lot of benefits with mixing different disciplines together. And I guess what I mean by that is hopefully might be kind of somewhat evident in this slide. I'm just reading it here while I'm talking to you. You know, it begins really at the very, very start of the process with things like, you know, concept visualization or even art department concept art. The idea being that if we begin in engine, if we begin and predicate everything on an in-engine environment, the idea and the ambition would be that if we could connect all of the departments early enough and the communication was strong enough and everyone kind of was aligned on that one goal, the idea would be that the content could propagate through this pipeline. And I know this also looks, you know, serial, which it isn't really, because there'll be a lot of interdependencies that would naturally kind of come out of this kind of pipeline. So we would begin concepting in Unreal Engine, using the power of Unreal Engine's really strong visualization tools to work with the art department and the showrunner or the director or the DOP to start to kind of just riff around in real time and just explore ideas, art direction ideas, very broad brushstrokes ideas. Then the idea would be that would move forward into what might even be a previs stage, and the tech viz stage would also start to happen. Both of those would start to happen in parallel. And the tech viz stage obviously is very, very important if the destination is an LED wall. It doesn't have to be. That's the other thing as well. I mean, Unreal Engine and virtual production doesn't necessarily mean LED wall in every case. You know, sometimes it's just not present at all in the show. But there's still a lot of gains for bringing in real-time tools and processes into the traditional VFX. But I say traditional VFX pipeline. You know what I mean? You know, like an offline renderer and kind of a serial process. So you've got things like concept viz, previs, and tech viz all kind of happening at the same time and iterating together. At the same time, you then bring the army of VAD artists on board, and they then begin to iterate upon the content. The end goal being photorealism on an LED wall, because that's effectively what we're making. We're making virtual versions of real sets. So that it is inherent within that it's photoreal. So there's that iterative cycle. Because it's all holistic and we're all working through Perforce, of course, and everyone's connected, ideally, of course, this is in an ideal world, right? It's everyone's kind of communicating, Perforce is wrangling all of the data, no one's stepping on each other's toes, all of the departments are kind of talking to each other, and the rising tide lifts all ships. That's the general idea. And as you move forward then onto the LED wall, Mark and his team will talk about that process of taking content and then joining the dots between my team and the Onset team, the Onset folks with the wall. The VAD team will continue to iterate. And then after that, there is, and once again, this may not be a requirement, the kind of last point on this journey, I suppose, is the handoff to the traditional VFX pipeline. And that's not necessarily a given requirement either. Sometimes you can render directly out of Unreal Engine, which I'm sure we probably all would love to kind of get to as Unreal fans. There is still a massive, our partners at Dneg are some of the best in the whole world for doing all of this offline rendering stuff. So we need to build an interface between the real-time processes that we do and a way to kind of seamlessly get that information, whether it's layout, lighting, animation, all of that stuff needs to somehow, I say somehow because we haven't solved it yet, and it's the holy grail, I think, with loads of folks here at the talks today. But just kind of joining those dots. And you can kind of see that it's not something that we've invented, it's not something that's particular to our process, but this is something that a lot of folks are trying to achieve. With Unreal Engine being basically that hub, the idea of one input, multiple outputs. One input being, well, it's actually multiple inputs, but one kind of environment to hold those inputs with then multiple outputs to different departments.
Yeah, and one thing, and Ed's favorite that we can't forget is virtual humans.
Yeah, this is a new nugget that we're trying to figure out. I mean, up until this point, we've been lucky that we've actually had an opportunity to do quite a few large virtual production shows. I mean, you've seen some of them already that Jim showed you in the previous slide, and there's a bunch that we can't show you yet, of course. Everyone's got that story. But now and somehow we've managed to dodge the requirement to put loads of digital humans onto these walls. I don't know whether that's through luck or whether we've just kind of managed to talk the client out of the requirement. But probably a bit of both. But now they're expecting it. We need to start populating these virtual worlds with living things, animations, ambient animations such as birds, animals. Obviously, of course, humans are a big one. And metahumans are a big part of that. At Dimension, we also have a partnership with Microsoft, the volumetric capture stage. So we do that as well. If you folks are familiar with that, it's like a volumetric video. It's a 3D. I remember when I joined Dimension, I had no idea what it was. And, I think Callum tried to explain it to me, and I blew my mind. But so they're basically like geometry caches that we capture from live performances, and we can play back in a linear fashion within the engine. So we have a couple of options. There's that, or just standard skeletal meshes like metahumans. But then, of course, there's a challenge. If we have 100, 200 of them, how do we render those at frame rate in engine? Also, what if the director wants to adjust them?
Yeah.
That's the other thing, because they start to get used to being able to make changes in real time. As you all know, making animation changes in real time is not real time, right?
Yeah.
So that's a challenge. So yeah, this is going to be an interesting one, an interesting requirement to see develop over the next while.
Yeah, the reason why we bring this up too is because it's become more and more prevalent for us on ICVFX projects, is looking at is it going traditional, crowd sim way, or are you going massive? Are you going Houdini? And looking at just how fast MetaHuman Creator has progressed, even in the past year, it's looking like the the creatives outside are becoming more and more aware of the technology. They're starting to educate themselves, or we're working with them. And I think all of our jobs is to be educators as much as creatives and technologists, just because there is a gap.
Yeah, I mean, it also informs approach on set as well. You know, I mean, if the director and the DOP and everyone who has that are part of that decision, as to that decision being how do we shoot this shot, if they know the limitations of certain aspects within the scene, like, you know, for instance, we can't just reanimate 200 metahumans in an hour. We just can't do that. That will then inform how they shoot the shot. That will then inform the shooting order on the day. And so you start, I mean, this whole idea, this communication cycle and this communication loop becomes crucial at that point, doesn't it? Or critical, I mean.
Yeah, I mean, I think the most important thing in any production is communication, whether it's your own team or external teams or other department heads or HODs. Most projects fail or hit a big speed bump, usually because of communication issues.
Yeah. So I mean, that's the content creation section of it. The next, well, it's not the next step, because what Mark's going to describe happens in parallel with everything anyway. But I'm going to hand the mic over to Mark now to talk about the content management department.
Yeah, so content management, I guess, was born out of the necessity of, you know, delivering real-time projects within, you know, live environments and on large-scale projects where, you know, obviously we've got a lot of technical requirements in order to deliver the creative vision that the client has. So we've essentially kind of got like a group of services and functions that we have, and we act as a department, but as the guys mentioned, we kind of work with all other departments and we work throughout the project. So I guess, and it's a really important point, is that this isn't something that happens at the end. It's not an afterthought. We kind of set out our best practices and processes that we have. And yeah, that's sort of something consistent throughout all of our projects. Hopefully a lot of the, actually just go back, sorry. Hopefully a lot of the, you know, areas that we've got here aren't kind of going to be new to people that are from a real-time background. Some of these things are kind of new to people that come at this from traditional VFX, and some of these things are different in a, you know, in a live environment and at the scale that we're talking about for virtual production. So like we have some considerations, for instance, with source control, you know, where we need a separation between our stage team and like our volume and our build teams essentially, and yeah, things like quality assurance and, you know, testing. We'll get onto it, but it's a little bit different to what you might find in games development or software, in that, you know, we're very content focused and we're often dealing with vast amounts of assets and things like that, and not so much in an interactive sense, but just in a, you know, what's in frame, and, you know, how we can get the best out of the view.
Yeah, and in content management, the other big part of it, like coming from traditional VFX and DI, is you're still looking at a conform process that's happening, especially in a multi-vendor project, which a lot of the projects that we do are multi-vendor. Exactly. So that ingesting, optimizing, handing off, preparing for it to come into our pipeline or for us to work within another pipeline, that's a big key part to content management, which does affect VAD as well and Onset. So it has this ripple effect. So that's why we spend so much time on looking at content management, because it has a lot of different parts to it.
Yeah, so it's kind of important that the people that are actually kind of going to actually operate the virtual production volumes are like kind of involved so heavily in the, you know, the creation side of our assets and of our environments, because it basically essentially means that when we're trying to, you know, respond to feedback and things like that, all the scenes are built in a way which enables us to do that. You never kind of want to be responsible for operating a volume and having no idea what that environment is or how it was built, and things like that. So we're kind of heavily involved throughout. And yeah, we kind of offer a wide range of virtual production services. Like it's not just LED volumes, it's simulcam, and it's, you know, all of the other things that virtual production can mean. Yeah, which, you know, adds a huge amount of value. And I guess we found as well that like there's a lot of kind of shared ground between these as well. You know, like once you've got a tracked camera, like you can kind of, you know, you've got simulcam kind of off the back of that, and, you know, there's kind of gains that you can have by, you know, using the assets that we've already created within Unreal in various different ways, and getting all the value out of them.
Yeah, it's something too that we found on a couple of shows that we've done simulcam is that the dailies team loves us. They're basically getting a slap comp in real time. So that's another thing about what we've all talked about is like key in getting relationships to the other departments, camera team, DIT, VTR, audio, all of that on set is you become like a hive mind, because if audio team is triggering, your sequencer because we have to go to a click track or a playback track, like we all have to be in sync. Who are we getting, Genlock and sync from? Is it coming from DIT? Is it being driven by audio? So we have to be like, best friends with everybody on set or on these projects, and it all has this, circular, virtuous cycle of like content flow, communication flow between all the departments.
Yeah, so a lot of what we're doing is kind of developing new workflows essentially, and that can be tools and sort of editor scripts and things like that to just sort of speed up process, or sometimes we're developing something to actually do a function that we don't currently have available. Annoyingly, because we're kind of on that cutting edge, we're at the point where we're kind of developing tools just before Epic released something better than what we are able to put together very quickly. But that's all kind of part of the fun of solving things for the first time and kind of being at that cutting edge.
Yeah, the great thing about it is the relationship I think all of us have with Epic, and just that feedback from not only support from a project, but just like development support, between Ryan and Thomas and all the different teams out there, from the product managers through to specific people that are making all of our lives much easier by saying, well, what do you need in VCam, or what would make simulcam better, what would make composure better, EXR playback, like all of these fun things that drive us crazy at times. I think the team at Epic has been, ears open the whole time, for not only for us, but talking to other friends at other companies. It's been kind of the same thing.
Yeah, and I guess the great thing about this development as well is that the progress is shared across all of our projects, right? So we actually have our source control set up so that we can share this work, so that these tools live in one place and they get brought in, which is great because we're progressing so much. And across QA we are kind of doing, like as I said, it begins as soon as we start development. So we're continuously profiling throughout. You don't want to find out just before shooting something that you're not hitting performance targets. The value that we get from this is like, more than you could possibly describe, because you're actually immediately finding out about issues, right? So we're tracking like frame data, we're tracking all of our kind of view modes, as you can see there. And we output that like CSV data into a spreadsheet, and we can actually then track that on charts and all that sort of stuff, which means if we see a sudden spike, we're like, okay, well, what happened in that commit? And then we can fix it immediately. It basically just allows us to kind of stay on top of that and throughout.
Yeah, so that's really important. I'm a big fan of metadata and live metadata staying across an entire project. I think the way that we deal with data sets, sometimes you may use all of your takes for camera track because you have a very selective dailies team, or director just was like, I want all of it. So metadata traveling across our projects as a whole, and even thinking of it for archiving, because who knows if the feature we do today doesn't get up-res to 36K down the road for Netflix's Uber version. So that having that live metadata, whether VFX or editorial or post is going to use it, we build it into our workflows anyway, because we don't know how someone may or may not use that data across once it leaves us in VAD or content management or Onset. Speaking of that, it's a great segue to Onset services. So being that this talk is about end-to-end, we're covering through our different departments and leading up to our Onset teams that go out. Obviously, whether it be LED volume, whether it be just simulcam, whether it be for feature film or for broadcast or for TV or for projects like that we do for games and fashion industry. They're all, I think, clients today and creative agencies and even individual independent directors YouTubers. We can't forget some YouTubers are doing some amazing stuff, of what they're doing. Look at Corridor Digital. Look at like umpteenth amounts of YouTubers that have turned into their own studios. So that whole line of like, who's the pro filmmaker, content creator versus the big studio, those lines have very much been blurred because of technology access. So the teams that come onto set, which is my background and spending a lot of time, as a DP and a visual effects artist on set, this feels very familiar to me. This is like home for me, dealing with cameras and rigging and camera tracking and DIT carts, and lots of tech gear. The teams that come on set, sometimes we may have a lead TD who's worked on VAD or previs or TechViz for us, might be the lead TD that may be driving volume control on set. And for those volume control brain bar, they're synonymous with each other. Depends on what show you're on and who calls what. So the teams that execute can be really small and focused. Depends on the project. To a show like Pinocchio, where we had more than 20 people on set, because we're dealing with multiple sets, having to swap teams between three different sets at any given time. So we may have TDs and simulcam carts at one set at the north end of a studio, and we have interactive lighting at a Vision LED happening at the other side with like a motion base.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of what can determine the number of people that go on set is how much we anticipate they'll want to change on set, right? So, in an optimal world, you would know exactly what you're going to shoot, and you would just provision the least amount of people for that, because it's just better to have less people, right?
Yep.
But with this technology, the promise of it is to enable flexibility and failing faster. The ability to try something and fail and try the next thing and fail and try the next thing and go, yep, that's what I want. So often that can determine how many people we put on set. And, that could be, there's almost like a minimum amount to make it work, right?
Yeah.
And then Mark's team will be there to make sure that it's compliant, and, then there's the data wrangling team and all of that. But one of the variables is the number of artists, the number of VAD that we have present. And you might imagine that's simply because we just want to cover the minimum amount of changes and then have some buffer for some gross changes or sometimes very significant changes in content. And that could be live, or it could even be the day before a shoot. And it's just one of those things that you kind of have to think about. And that's where the communication comes in again, right? It's knowing the director. What do they want to do? How do they normally work? Being very, very close with the VFX supervisor and the VP supervisor, of course, and then just provisioning the team accordingly, right?
Yeah, and hopefully if we're doing our jobs the right way, that allows us to send smaller teams to set, because we've done everything in terms of content check, optimization, all of that. So the team can be the core team that you would just need to supply. Obviously, if you have really big sets and we're going back and forth from that, that's when we do a little bit of a divide and conquer, as like saying, okay, you're with principal and we're on second unit and you're on third unit or pickup. So
the other thing that was interesting to me as an art manager, often, Jim's just described that as his home, and that's where he's super comfortable. Artists, not every artist is very comfortable being on set. Only some types of people are comfortable on set. It can be a very high pressure, and it's incredibly exciting because of that. But sometimes and this is kind of where Mark's team kind of maybe bridges the gap, because they tend to be technical, but they're also, not all of them, but a lot of them are naturally kind of comfortable on set as well. So it was almost like a new role that was invented with all of this stuff too. It's not just an Unreal TD. It was somebody that understood what being on set was like, and still being able to be operational to create content in Unreal Engine. It's a very particular skill. It's a hard one to find.
Yeah, as you all know, we're all searching for people of
We're
varying
hiring, by the way.
We are hiring. And we have a slide for that at the end. So this is one thing that I bring up. I won't spend a ton of time because this is a rat hole of like a lot in there, is that the building of the volumes. Even though we have had input and work with clients to do this, our focus is the pixels, the content, and making sure that the content that is going up onto the walls is our focus, and that's what our teams are really good at. Luckily, we have worked with a lot of good partners. Our partner that has helped us build our stages in London and LA, which is Monolith Studios, has been really great in also helping in terms of the information and education share back and forth from each other's of like why certain LED panels when we go into a test together of looking at the different substrates versus the pixel pitches and all of this stuff and you know working with people that have had a lot of experience coming from the live visual world, from event-based, like they have that side down pat. They can rig something up in 3 days, safely, securely, meet OSHA spec, meet everything you need, you know, depending on the case, and they're really good at finding where all the panels are living in the world. So
yeah, I mean, that is an interesting point, though, Jim, because what it has kind of definitely shown us, and I know other facilities and other companies are actually doing a similar thing, which is out of necessity forming partnerships. Simply because, you know, there's so much to know with this. It's not one company can know all of the things to the correct level, you know. So leaning into that and just going, you know, let's just kind of work together, and because it needs to be super tight. It needs to be almost more than a partnership. You know, it's you know, joint ventures in the example between Dimension and Dneg and Monolith, and it's just identifying the experts in those fields and letting them do what they're best at.
Yeah, and to that point, I mean, it takes a lot of us to get these things done, especially at the feature film or episodic level. You know, we've been on shoots for months at a time, weeks at a time, and you're having to swap out people so they're not burning out or team. And it's a good way not only to get some junior artists time on set so they can get familiar with that ecosystem. It turns into a really good education time for us to train up juniors to be more of a senior TD role. TD goes maybe to, you know, soup, you know, so there's this path that we're always looking at of like, we need other people. And I think that's the best way to do it is like, if you put a person from one role into a position that they get visibility onto all these other roles, half the people, you know, don't know a lot of camera terminologies. You know, if you ask a TD about filtration on a camera, they may have no clue, but they're going to need to know that relation of being able to do a similar feature for a DP within the engine. So that terminology understanding and education that happens on set is really beneficial to artists and technicians as a whole, because not everybody gets to see the both sides.
And just as a small additional point to that, it is, you know, it's something that we're trying to communicate to educational institutions as well. When they ask us, you know, what could the curriculum be? What would it look like if they were to do a virtual production course, you know, as opposed to a games design course or just a generic real-time one? It is what Jim's described. It's knowing the language of filmmaking and just being able to kind of understand what that means in engine, and it's kind of analog within the engine and being able to kind of work in those criteria.
Yeah, definitely. I know we're winding down on time, but I wanted to at least get through some of Pinocchio. Pinocchio was a really great project to work on. It was one of the first really big feature films that Dimension had worked on to deploy a full Unreal Engine workflow.
I saw Tom Hanks. That's all I got to say about that. Yeah.
But I'll rifle through some of these, and it was really great to work with Bob Zemeckis and Kevin Bailey and Don Burgess and the extended teams at Disney, and not only that, but other partners that we worked with at Halon and Mold, who were great to work on as well.
You know, once again, truly multi-vendor show. Yeah.
Yeah, and this was a great project for us to look at just how that multi-vendor and integration worked on. This was the first film to use 426, and you know, as everybody knows, there were some bumps in the road with that version, but we took a risk, and there were definitely some benefits for what we were doing in Adavision LED, simulcam, and being able to use first pass animation sync with the audio team as well. So yeah, there's some stuff on set. There's obviously Don and Kevin. They're great to work with.
Who was that guy on the left? Did you go back one? Who was that person on the left there? Is that you, Mark, is it? Is that you?
No, that's me. That's Craig. Oh, Mark's in there somewhere. He probably had me delete his.
That was working.
Yeah, me and Mark. There's a heater. Don't you know? We shot at Cardington in the UK. It was extremely cold. It's an old Zeppelin hangar, but there was one heater. You see the glow of the heater trying to warm up the render nodes too. I may have burnt like a couple of sweatshirts and jackets on that one, but we had to steal that heater from other departments. So it was like every man and woman for the South for heat and what are those the hand warmers. It was like those were like gold on set. So this is an example, Adavision LED. We've got Callum McMillan, our CTO at Dimension. We've got Don's first AC, Julian. Show side VP Soup, my buddy John Root. And is that Frausig or somebody else? Yeah, I think that's Chris Frausig from our team.
I think what's also interesting about this slide is these LED panels weren't in camera. We were using these exclusively for off-camera indirect lighting, which is why when you look at the content that's actually on them, super high contrast, super bloomy, because that's all, we had this content, which we got from Mold. Mold were the vendor that provided the actual 3D content in Unreal Engine. We then assimilated it and we had to actually make those changes to it. So it ended up looking like that. That's not what Mold gave us, but that was what they want. That was for that show. That's what was needed. It wasn't an in-camera LED wall that they were shooting. It was all for the off-camera indirect lighting.
Yeah.
So it's another example of how it's not always in-camera.
Yeah,
LED
it's not
work.
always dual frustum in-camera visual effects. It is using LEDs for what it is. I mean, an LED volume is a giant softbox, basically. So the other things that are great about like an image like this is there's actually 5 around. They're basically on Manitous that can be articulated and moved around to get to the to Don Burgess's lighting of it. But Don, most DPs want to simulate. They want their light cards and they want their gobos and they want their traditional fills and flags and all this stuff. The great thing about it, whether you're on a volume or on at a vision LED like this for interactive lighting, is we build all of those. We build the light cards, we build the gobos, we have this. I forgot what we called like the little WYSIWYG fireworks and stuff that Craig was building on the fly. But all these lighting tools for Kevin and Don that they were just like, yeah, we'd like this because the kids are coming across the set this way, and we have this practical effect happening. We want interactive lighting to chase this because there would be that type of ambient lighting in the real world. So that's what we're trying to match it.
I think we're coming up on 5 minutes. If we
I'll hop through this. This was basically a quick overview of the pipe on Pinocchio, just between art department, how it stepped through. I can say that I luckily borrowed this from my buddy Kevin Bailey because he had a similar presentation this week at View. This is Simulcam in action at the Piazza. This was an early R&D test that we were doing actually before Principal, but it just shows you the flexibility. This is all running on Unreal Engine. We helped pioneer a new form of camera tracking with our friends at Grace Logic. It's called AirPixel now, but it is not optical based or marker based. It is ultra wideband based, so we can actually shoot through green and blue screens. We can have a lot of things that normally would be occluding optical and marker-based camera tracking. I'll preface this. This was probably one of my favorite days on Pinocchio, especially for Simulcam, because it was awesome to see Don and the camera operators really get behind using a game engine and using visualization like Simulcam for the film. So if you look in the bottom left over here, you're seeing the live Simulcam comp feed, and you have a stand-in digital of Pinocchio and parts of the set. So the benefit of this is Pete and the other camera operators are using this to hit their end marks or trying to get their field of view that Don wanted to reach. And the visualization has really helped for them to get the timing of these camera moves because we're on techno dollies, techno cranes, so it's really helpful from a visualization perspective on set to use this for timing and for hitting marks. And the content doesn't have to be one-to-one to final pixel. It's great that it's at a state of in between as like first pass animation or even from a VAD stage that it goes through an iteration. So as long as we get as long as we do a get early enough, we can get the content updates up for it. So here's some of the pros and cons. There really wasn't a ton of cons. Yes, did multi-user crash and did end display freak out and did a camera shut down, a physical camera shut down from here to there? Yeah, but that's every production. I'd be skeptical if something didn't blow up at some point on any set, no matter big or small. So there's a lot of benefits here.
You're always around though when that happens.
Yeah, it can be. I might be the gremlin in the system. Okay, so I had to at least get one meme in here for just how important it is to optimize. It's really, really important. I couldn't find a higher res of Ballmer here doing his developers, but I figured, if I can use some like NVIDIA AI to voice speech, I can have him, basically deep faked and AI his voice for optimization. These are some of the tools we have. I know we're coming down on time, so I can skip some of the last bit of slides, but I want to open it up to questions to everybody, and I can go through. This is some of the tools that we interface with, that we develop. The great thing about the relationship too with Dneg is being able to work with the Dneg R&D team, some of which are in the crowd here. And we get to either use off-the-shelf tools or develop new tools because sometimes there's gaps in technology that a DP wants this type of thumb controller to interface with with Unreal for a session where he or she may be using VCam or VR scouting, and we do a lot of that interaction.